genre.
Hello, Tuckers and Untuckers alike. Welcome to Beyond Geek By Night, where we will be discussing Geek By Night minute by minute. No, that's the wrong show. Where we will be discussing each episode of Geek By Night leading up to the series finale. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the series premiere and the first 4 episodes of Geek By Night, Reboot. I am your host, Matt Bennett. Beyond Geek By Night is a discussion after show for specific episodes of the Geek By Night series, so if you've not yet listened to Reboot, go do that now. Trust me, it's good. While we will be focusing on Reboot specifically, we won't necessarily be avoiding spoilers for later episodes, so if you haven't yet listened through the holiday special, be warned that you might get spoiled on some plot points. And here is our panel. I'm joined today by creator and executive producer Scott Carelli.
Hello.
Andrew Ball, who voices Simon Holt.
Hello there.
Ray Ruzzo, who voices Gwen Allen.
Hello.
And Reboot's guest star, Cosmo Peters himself, Paul Maki.
Hello.
Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
So,
Good to be here.
Scott, I want to start with you because a lot of our listeners might not know that the Geek by Night series that they are listening to is actually a reboot of a previous series that a lot of us call Geek by Night 1.0. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little about the journey from Geek by Night 1.0 to the series that we all know and love today?
So I originally created Geek by Night in 2007, I think. If my dates are correct, and cast actually all 3 of the guests that we have today in that original show. 2 of which as the same character, 1 of which as a new character, but in a similar function. So created that original show. Originally, it was written to be a YouTube video series, and the budget of which would have been way too high, and so I eventually switched that over to an audio drama after hearing some podcast audio dramas that were mostly dealing in fan fiction, things like Buffy Between the Lines, and realizing that there could be an opportunity for an original series in that realm. So I created this show as an audio drama at that point, and then used Buffy Between the Lines as a place where I could cast people. So I basically just stole all their actors and gave them original roles. I did that by actually offering to edit some scenes, because they would have, rather than having someone edit all of an episode, they would give editors specific scenes to edit, because they're not insane like I am. And then so I edited a few scenes, and I was like, oh yeah, I think I could really do this, and they seemed really happy with those scenes, and I started really liking the actors, so held auditions for these roles. And ended up casting the show. And the original show, it was a very small group. I didn't have anyone else helping me with the show. I mean, it was like the actors, and I had a few people helping writing scripts here and there. But for the most part, it was me doing all of the behind the scenes stuff and sort of directing and editing every episode. And it was a lot of work, and life stuff got in the way, and then life stuff got in everybody's way, and eventually one thing led to another, and the show just sort of stopped coming out, unfortunately. And that was, I think, in 2008 or so. We had actually written the final 5 episodes, but they were never produced because the episodes were released in sort of 5-episode chunks. And so there was the first 5 episodes, and then there was a break of like a solid 9 months to a year, and then the next 5 episodes came out. And then there was another break that just never ended. But the scripts were written, and the first 2 episodes, I think, were edited, and then my computer went kaput, and I lost everything.
Oh gosh.
Note to the kids at home: back up your things. But and so after that happened, that was sort of, I was like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know if I'm going to keep going or if I'm just going to start over or what. And then as I was waffling on what to do, a lot of the cast members, just got busy. Everybody's lives got busy, and it became increasingly apparent that we weren't going to be able to continue the show at the time. And then, I just sort of put the show on the back burner. It was always this thing that was bothering me, that I never got to end the show that I wanted, the way that I wanted to end it. And I never got to, do anything more with those characters. And I loved all of these characters so much, and the actors that were playing them. And I just wanted to hang out with everybody again. And eventually I went to grad school, and I had, some free time, and I didn't feel like I was doing anything particularly creative at the time. I had done some short films, and then those had all been finished, and there was nothing sort of happening at that point. And so I was like, well, what if I rebooted this? And Nick, who is my Nick Jimenez, co-executive producer, was my writing partner at the time, and I floated the idea to him. I was like, what if we rebooted Geek by Night, and we talk about all the things that we are sort of feeling as, people who are, millennials who are turning into adults and needing to grow up, but not, we still love all of this dumb superhero stuff and all of these things that, you're always told growing up that, like, oh yeah, you'll grow out of that eventually. And then you'll watch things like CNN all the time, and, I don't know, the NCIS or whatever.
Stuff adults do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that never happened. And, and it sort of gives you some anxiety, because you're like, well, I remember my parents, not getting over all of this stuff and treating it like it's a childish thing that you grow out of, and I never did. And is something wrong with me? And what is that like? What is that situation like? And I think that a lot of people our age, I think they have similar feelings about that stuff. Why don't I have a house and kids? My parents had me when they were in their, early 20s. What's wrong with me? Is there something wrong with me? Why am I not an adult yet? And I wanted to make a show about those feelings. And I think that originally the original show didn't really have sort of a deeper layer to it. I think their original show was more just like, yeah, they're geeks and they hang out. And it was more about me wanting to have a positive look at geek culture and the way that I see all of my friends, which are not the Big Bang Theory. And, I wanted something beyond that. And so that was the original intention of the show, the 1.0 version of the show. And that was it. And so with this new show, I wanted to do that plus all of this other stuff. And we started talking about the ways in which, like, if the show were to start rather than, Elliot and Gibson being in their early 20s, what if we started the show with them, about to turn 30, and, what are their lives like now? If none of the events of the original show had happened, where would they be? And then what would the monkey wrench of these, superpowers look like in their lives going into their 30s? And is there a way that we could turn that into an allegory for the way that we feel about our own lives and about, growing up and having this looming sense of responsibility, but not knowing how to get there or what to do with it. So that was sort of, that's sort of the where it came from. And then I reached out to all of these guys, and they all jumped at the chance to be in the show again, which I was honestly surprised by because of how busy everyone was, but it seemed like everybody sort of missed doing this. So I was really, really happy to have most of my cast back, and so gung-ho to keep going and start over. And yeah, that's sort of where we were at the beginning of Reboot.
Sure. I want to take the same topic to the voice actors. I wanted to go through the three of you and ask you, what was your involvement with Geek by Night 1.0, and why did you return for today's Geek by Night? Let's start with you, Ray.
Oh, wow. So I had been part of the Buffy Between the Lines folks. I did a little bit of everything for them. I did some writing, I did some editing, little bit of voice acting, and then when this opportunity came along, I sort of jumped at it. I was young, I was in college, and I don't know, I just, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm actually in real life about as awkward as Gwen, and so, you know, having this group of people online who were my friends was really important to me. And the story of my original audition, I sent in this tape that was like, I don't know, like babbling at this, like not breathing, just this very anxious ramble. And I had sent it off. And at that point I played it for my mom for a suggestion. She told me, like, you need to slow down, you need to do this, you need to do that. And it really got in my head. So when it came time to do the first episode of GBN 1.0, I had her voice in my head, so I was kind of, you know, pulling back a little bit. And Scott told me later he actually put my audition tape into the episode because I had just been more Gwen in that audition tape than after I had gotten this critique from someone who didn't know the show. So, you know, being like little aspiring actor that I was back then, it was just a lot of fun, you know, and I was really disheartened when everything kind of petered out the first time. And I had a real fondness for this character because I saw a lot of her in me. And so, when Scott came around again, X number of years later, I was working in an office and just completely different phase of my life. I was like, yes, I'm here, I'm doing this. And that, I think almost everybody had the same reaction of like, should we do this again? It's like, everyone's like, hell yes. Sign me up right now.
What about you, Paul? What was your involvement with 1.0 and why'd you come back?
Well, 1.0, of course, I like I believe all of us or most of us, he poached us off of Buffy Between the Lines, or harvested us out of there, or whatever you want to call it.
Transplant.
Shanghai.
I mean, I it wasn't as though I suddenly was not working with them anymore or something like that. It was just an additional project to work on. But I was originally with Buffy Between the Lines. I was mainly a voice character for the first for the first season of that, and then I did writing and editing and Foley and all kinds of things. But then I got the role of the Muffin Man. I can't remember Muffin Man's real name. But that was the deranged baker taking over hostages and such. And I actually used when I was first doing my experimental podcast audio novella with Jack Mangan's Deadpan podcast, Really Big Things. Sorry, that's a lot of titles all at once. On Jack Mangan's Deadpan podcast, I did a serialized audio novella called Really Big Things. It was experimental, and right at the beginning of when I started to do that, I was reading like all of the characters the same, and everybody sounded the same, and people said they were confused. So I ended up putting character voices on all of those, and not having a ton of range. I experimented with a few of those character voices when I was doing Muffin Man, and ended up with the I guess you'd call it Christian Bale as Batman. the real gruff thing. It's basically that. It sounds a little bit to me in my head like doing Harry Monster off of Sesame Street. But yeah, so I mean, I did that, and the character appeared in the second episode, I think it was, of the, or maybe it was like at the like basically part of the first arc of the initial series. And of course, when Scott asked if I would join back up the second time, I was like, sure, I'll do anything. I think by the time the character was finishing out the first series, we had dropped the Harry Monster voice. But so the new character, of course, I was like, I'll do anything, and he graciously wrote I don't know if he wrote Cosmo for me, but he definitely wrote a good new character instead of the deranged baker.
I definitely wrote Cosmo with you in mind.
Oh, thank you very much.
What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, like the others, I was originally with Buffy Between the Lines. I was a voice actor and director for them. I was in college and I was really getting into voice acting, maybe hoping to make a career of it. That didn't really happen. But yeah, I originally auditioned for Simon and Elliot. And sort of inverse to Paul, like on Buffy, I did a lot of character voices. Like, I played D'Hoffryn, I played a lot of demons and stuff. But for this, I was finally getting to use my real voice, which was nice. And, like Ray said, I saw a lot of Simon in myself. I am someone who, really does sort of judge my value by my intelligence. So there was, a kind of pride and vulnerability in Simon that I really related to. And, now I'm working in an office job, and when the reboot came up, I'm not doing any other voice acting stuff anymore, but damn it, I'm protective of Simon. He's my character, and yeah, I knew if I could come back, then I would, because I wanted to see where his story went.
Yeah, I'd love to keep talking about Simon. So, diving into the reboot episode here, when we see Simon waking up the day after the explosion at Swift Industries and sort of discovering his powers a little bit, this is one of my favorite parts of the episode. What I really like about Simon is that he is a scientist who also takes a scientific approach to exploring his own powers and everybody else's. So you mentioned this a little bit, and I'd like to hear more, but do you connect to that sort of analytical, logical part of Simon? Or in the same position, would you be having like a Gibson freak out when you discovered your powers?
I honestly would probably be having more of a Gibson freak out. But that is one of the things I love about Simon as a character, is that scientific mindset. I'm more of a creative type than I love science, but I'm not the most analytical person in the world. But I love how that's actually kind of one of the differences I love about Simon in the reboot, is his maturity. Like, he's, more socially mature, more in control of himself. So I love that when the powers do come up, he's like, all right, let's deal with this problem.
So this reminds me of a fun question that I want to ask each of you. So say it is the next morning after you played the game. What powers would you want to wake up with? Scott, how about you first?
Oh man, super speed without a doubt. just because I like I would enjoy moving from one place to another a lot faster than it takes in LA traffic.
Paul, what about you?
Oh, superpowers, I'd say either I'd go invisibility or flight, perhaps.
Ray, how about you?
I'm just gonna say I want super strength. I want to be able to like lift a tank over my head.
What about you, Andrew?
Fittingly enough, my cop-out answer to this is always super intelligence. Because, if you can invent the gadgets, then you can give yourself every other superpower.
It's true.
That's true. So, Ray, I want to shift to you for a little bit.
Sure thing.
So, Gwen's powers are used for really interesting story moments throughout the series. But in this first episode, it also brings a lot of really funny moments with you inhabiting the body of Joel Vickers, who is voiced by Zach Luna. Mm-hmm. And there's this technique of the two of you speaking at the same time because you're in his body, but with your mind. So what was the recording of this like? Did you record that first, or did Zach? And how do you think it ended up?
I recorded it first, and then Zach would... Or in this episode it was Zach, in any other episode it was whoever was playing the person I embody would then record to sort of match my vocal patterns. And I love it. I think it came out so great. And it was exciting for me because in 1.0, whenever I took over somebody else, it was just the other voice actor. So me and my vanity, I got to hear a lot of more of my own voice this time around. No, I just think it was a really cool effect, and it was just fun. I don't know, there's something about it. It's really unique. And because it's an audio format, there's only I feel like there's a little bit of limitation in what's going to play well. And I just think it came across so cool.
Awesome. Paul, you've got the next one. One of the great things about Geek by Night is that even the antagonist characters, the ones who oppose our heroes, aren't always necessarily evil people. It's even mentioned in Reboot that Cosmo is more of an anti-hero than a villain. So, is this how you would describe Cosmo? Do you think Cosmo's still a good guy? Oh yeah, I'd definitely say so. I mean, he was originally the comic book store's owner first, and I wouldn't say that his situation forced him to be bad that much. I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily the most articulate person for these recordings. That's okay. I'm sorry. That's all right. Scott, do you want to tell us about some of the creative choices between writing somebody who is traditionally seen as a villain, but our characters know and is sort of developed as a human being before getting his powers?
Yeah, I mean, it's like that old chestnut in storytelling. Every villain is the hero of their own story, and if you're going to write a proper villain, then you need to understand their perspective. And so with all of this, I mean, one of the biggest creative touchstones for us when writing Geek by Night is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I think that, one of the things that show always did really well is when they would have a Monster of the Week sort of character, it was always tied into the theme of the episode, the story that they were telling, and very rarely was the monster just a monster. It was usually representing something, or they were more complicated from a character standpoint, where you sort of understood where they were coming from a certain point of view, and I wanted to bring that to this show as well, because I actually do miss shows like that, the sort of monster of the week, freak of the week sort of thing. I mean, a lot of shows abused that format and would have a lot of episodes that would be filler episodes. I'm looking at you, Smallville. But in general, I think that if you use that format properly, I think you can turn out some of your best episodes would be separate from whatever the ongoing mythology would be. You know, some of my favorite Buffy episodes and X-Files episodes had nothing to do with the season arc. They were just a really cool character story. And that's sort of, I wanted to find a way to sort of have my cake and eat it in that. I didn't want to have an episode that didn't have anything to do with anything, but I wanted to make sure that each episode's story stood on its own, something you could probably listen to without the context of the rest of the show and enjoy to a certain extent. And then if you were listening to it as part of the grander structure of the show, you would also get more of a mythology side of things out of it. But yeah, so I always treated every villainous character that we tried to come up with on the show as a character first, and really get in their head. And I think that all started with Cosmo. I think Cosmo's character built the sort of structure that we ended up going with in future episodes.
Yeah, if I could, now that I've been thinking about it more, I mean,
Sure.
yeah, Cosmo is definitely more of a. I see him more of the victim, and the victim that's lashing out when he gets the opportunity, more than a villain.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he really has any. I don't think he. Is there a lot of collateral? I'm trying to remember. There's not a lot of collateral damage to people that weren't involved with his victimization.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, so I mean, that definitely works out with the anti-hero vibe.
So, Scott, you mentioned Buffy the Vampire Slayer and X-Files as influences, particularly in terms of the Monster of the Week format. Mm-hmm. What are some other influences that you had on writing the show?
Gilmore Girls is definitely there. That's, just due to the fact of, having a cast of recurring characters that just pop in and do their thing. Because I've always loved that. The problem is that I love characters too much, and so I fall in love with them, and so I just keep giving them more things to do, rather than writing new characters. I just keep using the same ones over and over again, it's sort of, I think I get that from like Gilmore Girls and The Simpsons and things like that, where they create a one-off character and then they're like, I actually like this character a lot, so they just keep bringing him back over and over again. And obviously the sort of pitter-patter of the dialogue that definitely comes from Amy Sherman Palladino and her influence, but also Edgar Wright movies and all kinds of stuff. This show is like really from, at least for Nick and I think it's just a mashup of everything that's ever influenced us, I think. And yeah, so it's just very much I don't know, our whole deal. Because I mean, that's the thing, is like we're writing this and it can be whatever we want it to be, and so it just becomes very much us.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a really quick commercial break here. Today's episode of Beyond Geek by Night is brought to you by Monopoly Comics. Monopoly Comics, because where else are you going to go? And we're back. So this show is very much a celebration of being a geek, being, kind of celebrating the things that society tells us that we should not be obsessed with or big fans of. So I want to go around the circle and ask everybody, what are you a geek about? What about you, Andrew? What are you a geek about?
Let's see. Superheroes, though I lean a little more DC than Marvel. Space travel, dinosaurs, and Xena Warrior Princess.
What about you, Paul?
I guess, I mean, It's kind of interesting. We all have our geek specialties. I don't really have the comic book angle at all, which is funny because I'm the original comic book owner in the beginning, and I had to look up. I had to look up at the time how to pronounce Mjolnir because I wasn't sure. But I am definitely. I would call myself a high level Buffy geek. Whedon, for the most part, I guess, geek. And then also just I'm a big, not specifically any particular source, but I'm a big fan of any multiverse storylines.
And Scott?
Oh man, Doctor Who, Buffy, comics in general, and just so many things. So many things. It's and just growing every year. So yeah. But Doctor Who, I would say Doctor Who and Spider-Man are probably like the two biggest ones for me, at least at the moment. So yeah, I would say those ones.
Yeah, it was really important for me to ask that just because this show, I think, is, it's a lot of it's about giving, I guess, permission for people to be a geek about something. And I think that's really, really important, really powerful, and I think is a big draw of the show. Mm-hmm. Paul, I want to come back to you. So there's a stinger at the end of this episode where, the action has really settled, the story's getting wrapped up, and the mysterious woman sort of recruits Cosmo. This is definitely explored more later in the series, but at the time of recording Reboot, did you know where this was going, or were you as in the dark as the listeners when that happened?
Not a bit. I had no clue what was going to happen next.
So, Scott, when you were writing this episode, did you have a clear idea of where it was going, or were you trying to set yourself up for later?
No, I knew exactly who that person was and where that storyline was going and how it was going to connect the things. I had done a lot of set up stuff that I didn't really have answers for on the previous show, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't do that this time. So I made sure that we had talked about the sort of mythology of the show and where certain things were going. And it helped because it allowed us to sort of set some things up and release some hints here and there about where things were going, so that when people went back and listened to the show, it really did seem like we knew what we were doing. And we didn't just sort of stumble backwards into a solution.
Sure. So this episode is also, along with our introduction to all the characters, it's an introduction to sort of the production value of Geek by Night, and one of the really defining things for me is the music. So while we're hopefully going to have the Scott Tofty on in a later episode to dive more into this, I was wondering, Scott, if you could tell us a little bit about the direction for the music and what you were looking for and some of the choices you made with that.
So in 1.0, we had no music. We had a couple of needle drops, and we had the main theme from the original series, which was a Nerf Herder song called "I'm Not a Loser," and that was kind of it. The show itself, like when you were listening to the show, there was no score, there was no incidental music, and so that was definitely one of the things that I wanted to change about this. And knowing that Scott, who plays Max, of course, is a musician, I just asked him if he would be interested in composing the music for the show, and he was sort of really excited to take that on, and I'll let him talk more about that whenever he gets on here. But as far as a creative direction for all of that, I kind of just we sort of worked through it, because in the first episode he was trying to recreate some of the transitional music that I had done. We had some transitional music that sort of broke up scenes so that the listener knew when we were transitioning into a new scene, and it was just like this little acoustic guitar riff that I wrote and recorded with a sort of it was like a guitar it was like a virtual guitar video game on a Nintendo DS. And I forget what the name of this thing was, but that's what I wrote the music with, because at that point I had previously been a musician but had quit music, and so I didn't have any instruments, but I did work at GameStop, so I just checked that game out, which they let their employees do, and then I just recorded some stuff for the show and just used that as transitional material. But the previous iteration of the show was a lot more sitcom-y, and that riff was sort of sitcom-y. It reminded me of the sort of music that they play in establishing shots in like Friends. Like it's like, oh, they made a joke, and then like they'd play this little guitar riff, and oh look, it's the coffee shop, and now we're in the coffee shop, and then the scene starts. And that was sort of what the music reminded me of. And at first Tofty was doing that, was doing a sort of variation of that. And then it wasn't until I put it into the show that I realized, like, oh, this isn't really working because it's giving it a sitcom vibe, which isn't really what I wanted to have. And we sort of talked through it, and he figured out, rather than looking at sitcoms for inspiration, he started, I think, thinking more in terms of a 1 hour drama like a Buffy or whatnot. And so he came up with I think a musical identity for the show that I think works really well, and it's now a thing where I think I know what Geek by Night sounds like, and I think he does as well, where I just sort of trust him to come up with cool stuff, and he always does. So it's been a really great collaboration, I think, because I've really given him a lot of leeway as far as what I want. You know, I was like, I don't want the sitcom-y stuff. Other than that, you know, like you figure out what you want to do with it. And I think he was able to come up with something really unique and something that doesn't sound like anything else. And it's distinctly Geek by Night, I think.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear about those intentional choices for the music. You know, in a lot of ways, I think Geek by Night really couldn't be any other medium other than a podcast, considering some of its choices. Mm-hmm. So on that note, I have another question for the whole circle. What podcast are you listening to right now? Or if you're not listening to anything right now, what is a very good one that you've listened to recently? Let's start with you, Andrew.
Actually, it's funny you should ask, because I just recently started a new job with a half-hour train commute. So I have taken the opportunity to finally start listening to Welcome to Nightmare, which I am just adoring, because I'm weird and slightly macabre, so it's right up my alley.
What about you, Paul?
I used to be a really voracious podcast consumer, because I was working a job that was basically like manufacturing type. It was optical media duplication. So there was a lot of time where I was just by myself working machines. I didn't have to hear anything happening, so I just had earbuds in my ears all the time. But now I work master control operator at a television station, and it's pretty critical to actually hear what's happening on the air. So I really don't have that kind of opportunity anymore. Plus, I live in a much smaller town now, so I don't have commutes anymore either. My commute is literally 5 minutes up the hill to the TV station. So, but that said, I do have a couple. I'll refrain from plugging my own at the moment. But I have been listening to the Buffering the Vampire Slayer podcast and its companion Angel on Top, as well as Veronica Mars Investigations, which has I'm really bad with people's names suddenly, but it has the same Jenny Owen Youngs is the host of both Buffering and on Veronica Mars Investigations. and then it doesn't necessarily count as a podcast, but I listen to a couple of different BBC Radio 4 podcast feeds for Friday Night Comedy and the quiz shows.
Scott, how about you?
Currently, I am binge listening to Blank Check with Griffin and David, and which is a podcast where the hosts take a filmography from a director, and they cover each film in the filmography, and they try and find directors who at some point get basically a hit so big that they're given a blank check, and then the thing that they like talking about is what they did with that blank check and whether or not the movie worked out for them, whether that's creatively or financially. And then, of course, I'm listening to what is probably my favorite podcast, which is Podcast The Ride, which is a comedy podcast about theme park rides. And they talk about a different ride each episode, and they talk about the history of the ride and all of that, while also being very funny. So that's one that I am fully caught up on, but I can't wait for a new episode every week.
That sounds really interesting. Mm-hmm. So Scott, another one for you. Later episodes in the series were casted by Gretchen West's actress Chelsea Kern, but this initial episode was largely casted by you. So what were some choices that you made in casting either specific characters or this ensemble cast?
Well, obviously most of my work was done for me because I just brought back a lot of the original cast. Everyone except for Elliot and Mindy, and then Gretchen was a character that I think we mentioned but never actually cast before in the original show. So, I had that. And actually, part of the inspiration for bringing the show back was that I was directing a short film called The Cupid Division. And while I was directing it, I was sort of looking at my actors and thinking about Geek by Night, and looking at my actors and thinking about Geek by Night. And I was like, wait a minute. Because I just realized that my two leads in that were like just everything that I imagined Mindy and Elliot to be, and those were two of the actors that I knew that I wouldn't be able to get back. Kevin Ziegler was one of the Elliots in Geek by Night 1.0, because there is technically a 1.0 and a 1.5. But he was our 1.5 Elliot, and he came back to do artwork for the show and things like that, but he was not interested in coming back as in an acting role, though he is really happy with what Matt did with the character, and because he felt a little. Once the show actually started going and we had cast Elliot and everything, he reached out and was like, I'm actually kind of bummed that I didn't come back. And I was like, well, I asked you, man. But he was really happy with Matt's performance, and so he's happy to be just taking a back seat and doing the artwork and stuff. And then of course we just couldn't get a hold of our original Mindy. I don't know, she just fallen off the grid or something. So while directing this short film, Matt and Morgan were just both like exactly what I had always pictured for Elliot and Mindy, just their regular personalities, and the way that they interacted with people on set. Mindy, being that more brash and giving people a hard time, and Morgan can be like that sometimes when she's feeling confident, and Matt being a kind of a nervous wreck of a person a lot of the times, but then also confident when he's when he has to be, and. So, they were very much just those characters, and I was like, wow, that's great. And then I originally wrote Joel for one of my other actors in that short film, but he ended up not being able to play the part, and that left, of course, Chelsea, who was I didn't have an idea for a character, but then when I thought about bringing Gretchen into the fold and creating that whole Gretchen mystery, part of me was like, oh, that would actually be a great role for her. But then also the other part of me, creatively and selfishly, knowing that I would love to give her that role, but also Gretchen is going to be gone for most of the season, and that would bum me out to cast Chelsea in that role, and then her just not be in most of the show. Which I think that my guilt from casting her as that character, I think is partially at least responsible for making her casting director, because I still wanted her to be extremely involved. And so when it's like, okay, you're going to be gone at the halfway through this first story, but I still want you involved, so please be the casting director or something. And I could always count on her to get stuff done that needed to be done during the short films and things like that. So I knew she would be great at it, and she was more than great at it. She totally blew me away as far as what she was able to accomplish. But yeah, I mean, in this first episode, it was largely me casting a lot of the people that I already knew. I knew that I wanted Paul to play Cosmo, because I knew that the Muffin Man wasn't going to come back, and I knew that I wanted Rachel to play the mysterious woman, because I knew that her character from Geek by Night 1.0 wasn't going to come back. And so it was a lot of that, and then whatever was left over, I just did my best to have an open audition thing through my other podcasts, and then that's how I ended up getting Zach, because Zach was a listener of my I had a Buffy rewatch podcast, and he was listening to that. And then when I said that this was happening, he auditioned for it and got it. And now, we hosted 3 seasons of Spider-Man Minute together, and he's a extremely good friend of mine. So it's weird how it all worked out, but yeah, I kind of just cast my friends for the most part in this first one. And then Chelsea made the whole thing more legitimate by casting outside of our friend circle.
Awesome. So as we wind down here a little bit, I've got one more question for the whole circle here. And obviously this is a comic book in audio drama form. So the big final question here is, who is your favorite hero or villain from a superhero story, whether it's a comic or a show or a movie? What about you, Andrew?
Squirrel Girl, definitely.
Yeah.
I know I said I prefer DC, but Squirrel Girl is the best.
Any particular reason?
I like the intention to keep superheroes from getting too self-serious. You gotta keep it light sometimes.
Paul, what about you? Who's your favorite?
When I was growing up, I didn't read tons and tons of comics, but the two that I followed briefly here and there were Green Lantern and Flash, and I'd have to say I'd have to pick Flash for sure if I was going to pick between those two. And just being open to all superheroes, I would say Buffy the Vampire Slayer, obviously, as well.
Scott, probably a tough question. But,
it's my 2 favorite superheroes of all time are Spider-Man and the Flash. The Flash's rogues are a big inspiration for the way that we write villains on this show. For me, just because of the rogues aren't his rogues. He has villains, but then he also has this group called the Rogues that are these sort of B-list villain characters who they have a code of ethics, and they're look, we never hurt women or children, and we only rob people who can afford it, and so they have this weird code of ethics, and it's this thing where the Flash is okay, I gotta stop you, but you could just knock it off. I mean, that'd be cool if you could just knock it off. And so I really love that dynamic, and I definitely brought a lot of that into Geek by Night and the way that our heroes interact with our villains.
Very cool. Well, it looks like we are running out of time here. I want to say thank you again to all of my guests today, Scott, Paul, Ray, Andrew, for joining me. And thank you to all of you, the fans, the underdogs, for listening today. If you'd like to support the show, please join the Dueling Genre Patreon at patreon.com/DGP. That's DGP as in Dueling Genre Productions. You can also tell your friends, families, and followers to subscribe to Geek by Night on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And stay tuned for the next round of episodes, the 4-part release of Status Quo. Thanks for going beyond Geek by Night with us, and we will see you next time.